Good evening. You're watching State of Business on our television. This is Zeenat Musafir. Let's take a look at the headlines first. Sri Lankan export basket needs diversification, says Paul Godfrey. Dr. Harshana Surya Peruma says compliance with regulatory framework compulsory for listed companies. News in details. Head of the Political, Trade and Communication section of the European Union delegation to Sri Lanka and Maldives, Paul Godfrey says that the Sri Lankan export basket requires diversification into different areas for a substantial drive in export revenue. He also made the following remarks with regard to the Sri Lankan economy during an exclusive interview with our television recently.
There's a value in diversification for the Sri Lankan economy as it moves to a more advanced economic status. Clearly, we would expect that Sri Lanka started to diversify into different areas. For instance, there's a lot of potential around technology, seeing some of the areas that are important for the Indian economy. Many of those could be copied and brought into the Sri Lankan market. There are other areas around acting as a hub for the whole of the South Asian region, providing services. The service component of the Sri Lankan economy is quite low for an economy that has aspirations to be upper middle income. So I think there's a lot of potential there in different areas for Sri Lanka to develop. I mean, clearly we've seen a lot of ambition from the government around developing the tourist industry, and again, that's an obvious area that we could see further development to support Sri Lanka's overall economic growth.
On a different note, Godfrey noted that to facilitate foreign direct investments into the country, the government should smoothen the investment process and improve transparency in Sri Lanka.
Well, we've seen quite impressive growth over the last 3 years, so I think up to 10% in terms of exports from Sri Lanka to the European market. There's no reason why that can't continue as a further trajectory. I think there's every opportunity for Sri Lanka to continue to grow its export share to the European market. But there are some fundamental challenges that the government needs to address, for instance on corruption and transparency, where there's a continuing concern about the procedures that are operating under, and a number of European investors who are looking to develop their business here and have a partnership with Sri Lanka find issues of concern in how they operate here. I think most obviously, if you look at things like the Transparency International index, then there's still a perception that there's widespread concerns about corruption in Sri Lanka. And I think also, if you look at a statistic like the World Bank's ease of doing business in Sri Lanka, there's still a number of areas where there's a lot of red tape that prevents easy flow of business. So I think these are two obvious areas where Sri Lanka could really make improvements that would really continue to cement and develop its share of exports to the European market.
A training and development program organized by the Institute of Chartered Corporate Secretaries of Sri Lanka was held in Colombo recently. Director Corporate Affairs of the Securities and Exchange Commission, Dr. Harshana Surya Peruma, made the following remarks with regard to the changing regulatory environment for listed companies.
There will be regulatory repercussions for non-compliance. That is how we gave ample time, almost 4 years plus, to adjust the public float. And if you have not, from 1st of July 2018, 42 listed companies who are non-compliant with this requirement are now in the watch list. So this is to show regulators' rules are not just rules on the book. We are serious about it as well. If you don't comply, there will be repercussions. We provide multiple options to comply as well. We give a 5-layer approach to comply. If you want, you can have 0%, rather no requirement of a percentage compliance, 7.5%, 5%, 10%. So multiple tiered strategy. And if you are still unable to comply in the main board, we allow the listed companies to transfer yourself to Dirisavi board.
We're going in for a short break. Do stay tuned for more news after these commercials. Welcome back. Aspirations Education launched Aspirations International Education Exhibition for the 12th consecutive year at the Hilton, Colombo. Aspirations International Education Exhibition creates an exclusive hub for students to interact with representatives from several universities and higher educational institutes directly, enabling them to get first-hand information with more credibility and accuracy. Since its inception, the exhibition has catered to the needs of both prospective undergraduate and postgraduate students in Sri Lanka.
The universities from Australia, New Zealand, US, Canada, Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, all of them are here and covering a range of vocations. The students have really benefited from this. Under one roof, you have the opportunity of talking to so many people who are able to give you a lot of variety of thinking. Hope that you can come to Aspirations Education at 267/20 Samagi Mavathanawala Road and meet with us. Our services are all free of charge and we are there to guide you every step of the way.
Now let's take a look at the weekly economic indicators released by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka last Friday. During the first 5 months of 2018, domestic tea production increased due to favourable weather conditions and high prices at the Colombo tea auction. Meanwhile, production of rubber declined considerably due to decreased auction prices. Coconut production continued to decline considerably during the period due to lagged effects of the drought that prevailed since 2016. During the period, crude oil prices followed a declining trend. At the beginning of the period, Brent crude oil prices fell due to rising output from OPEC, while WTI price rose due to supply disruptions in Libya and Canada. Overall, Brent and WTI prices fell by $1.5 per barrel and 80 cents per barrel respectively within the period. The weekly average weighted prime lending rate for the week ending 6 July 2018 remained unchanged at 11.33% compared to the previous week. The reserve money increased compared to the previous week, mainly due to increase in currency in circulation and deposits held by the commercial banks. The total outstanding market liquidity decreased to a deficit of 22.83 billion rupees by end of the week, compared to a deficit of 33.70 billion rupees by the end of last week. Moreover, during the year up to 6 July 2018, the Sri Lankan rupee depreciated against the US dollar by 3.8%. Given the cross-currency exchange rate movements, the Sri Lanka rupee depreciated against the pound sterling by 2.0%, euro by 1.7% and Japanese yen by 5.5%, while appreciated against the Indian rupee by 3.5% during the period. We're going in for a short break. Do stay tuned to see how the stocks perform today after these commercials. Welcome back. Trading at Colombo Stock Exchange ended on a negative note today. The All Share Price Index dropped 31.39 points to close at 6,077.32 and the S&P SR20 dropped 25.29 points to close at 3,298.23. The turnover was 154.8 million rupees and 5.9 million shares were traded. Next is Forex rates. That's all the news we have for you today. Join us tomorrow with State of Business on our television at the same time. Until then, take care and good night.